We'd like to thank you, our valued listeners, for your interest and support over the past 18-odd months. What was initially FX Radio has grown exponentially to include not just our podcasts in FX Medicine Podcast Central on iTunes, but we'd like to also introduce the recently launched FX Medicine website. This is our reservoir of resources, research and educational content for complementary medicine. Come and be a part of the community at fxmedicine.com.au. This is FX Medicine, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And today with me on the line is Dr. Steven Lin, a dentist who trained at Sydney University in a background of biomedical science. Steven works with a focus on the systemic effects of oral disease. A TEDx speaker and passionate health communicator, he is working to merge the dental and nutritional fields with the publication The Dental Diet, an exploration of evolutionary diet, genetics and nutritional medicine. Based on the pioneering work of Dr. Weston A. Price, Dr. Lin explores the link between modern industrialized food, dental disease and every other degenerational health problem known to mankind. Now you can follow Steven on drstevenlin.com or Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. And I'd love to welcome you today to FX Medicine. Steven, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's a great TEDx talk you did. I love the opening statement. How would you like something that would change your stance, change your confidence, and it's just a smile?
Yeah, I mean, I think the TEDx was great fun. But the real problem point that I came to when preparing that was, how do you make people interested in teeth? Because, I mean, as a dentist, that's something that we kind of fight with every day, people trying to avoid looking after their oral health and, perhaps misunderstanding how important it is. So, trying to find different angles on that was definitely a challenge doing the TEDx talk.
Absolutely. And I love that my dentist says you don't have to floss your teeth, only the ones that you wish to keep.
Exactly. There's lots of little quirky things that we dentists have to unfortunately come up with to get people to floss. He's a hard one. But, he's got a good point there.
And yet, it's such it really is such an important aspect of confidence, of how we interact with people. We're looking at people's faces all day, and yet we refuse to take care of this most important thing for our health, but also our interpersonal communication.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I mean, because, if you think about, the human face and how, we've evolved with the importance of, identifying other people through their face and through their voice, the mouth is such an important aspect of that. And we don't connect that, to our dental health and how our dental health influences this really crucial part of our being. And I think it's somewhat societal, something that we've come across in the dental industry isn't very old. So it's only been 100 or so years that we've been dealing with this very delicate part of the body, and I think we've built up a bit of a stigma. So it's definitely something that people avoid the dentist, and that perhaps reverberates through society in a way that we try and avoid oral health in some way or another.
Now, we're going to be talking about the way that food impacts our dental health and indeed the microbes that inhabit our mouth and even our gut. But I love the term industrialized food. I mean, that really smacks of what we eat day in, day out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's easy to kind of forget that term because it's just everywhere now. I mean, if you break down, what the regular Western diet is now, it really is coming out of a factory, and it sounds kind of a little bit sometimes a little bit tin hat, but if you think about the way what we're eating, most of the time it is industrialized processed food, and these are where a lot of the problems in our health are coming from.
I mean, my perfect example of this is if you look at, sourdough bread versus that lovely fluffy white cloud that we call bread, that 100 years ago they wouldn't have even known what that is.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example, and it's one that we do misinterpret a little bit because we're so we're starting to get the message across about sugars, but I mean, and how refined sugars are do so many bad things in the body, but flour is exactly the same. It's a simple carbohydrate that in our white breads, nearly all the white breads that we and other kind of bakery products that we eat.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that a bit of a misconception out there.
We could get onto a whole podcast about grains and grasses and how we react to them. But if we just talk about basic foodstuffs, how we've over convenienced them, if you like. It was one evolutionary step to say, well, let's cook it. To increase the availability of things like proteins and certain nutrients. It's another thing to mash it into a fine powder so that we have this massive insulin spike, though.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that comes to a good point, that you can nearly track, a lot of the problems that we start to get with food to when we commercialize and industrialize it. So when money became a factor, and when we started to mass produce things, when it stopped being a locally farmed, locally produced product from plants and the environment around us, mm-hmm. to something that is mass produced and transported in over long distances, and this is how we really started to change the food, and for much the worse.
Absolutely. Indeed, even getting away from starchy foods. What about even our meat? Our meat used to be those animal, let's say it was a red meat from a cow, that meat which was provided by a ruminant which ate grass, and now of course that ruminant eats corn and grains. So
exactly, yeah. You can nearly go through every foodstuff that we eat and find problems with the way we deal with it. I mean, beef is a great example. Grain-fed beef and how it changes the composition of the animal, where beef, a grass-fed cow has much more an omega fat makeup like a salmon, where there's a much more ratio of 3 to 6, whereas a grain-fed cow has a much higher ratio of 6 rather than 3, which we know causes a lot of inflammation and problems in the body. And
this, to me, is one of the big areas of issues where, we now look at and we label a food. So let's say we're talking about red meat causes ... Well, that wasn't the original red meat. So it's now that changed entity. So
exactly, and it's such a big problem in terms of how we look at our nutritional studies, how we break things down. We're very reductionist in the way we look at how diseases are caused by and this just isn't. There's so many factors that come into how an animal is raised and what it takes in from its environment that influences how our body reacts to it, and we just don't take that into account at all.
Yeah. So Steven, let's talk generally about how diet and that industrialized food has impacted on our dental health. What specific issues do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest, most concerning markers that we can kind of read from how food has affected our mouth is reading what we can record out of how our bacteria have changed. Now, research is showing us that the bacteria that used to live in our mouth used to be much more diverse than what it is today. So we've lost the different kinds of species that lived in a kind of ecosystem in our mouth, and you can almost track that to 2 points. One with the agricultural evolution, and also the industrial revolution, where we started to change, where we started to farm, and where we started to refine our foods. This is how we started to change the bacteria in our mouth, and we know that the dental disease popped up at the same time, and you can nearly track it identically to when we lost diversity of the microbial environment in our mouth.
And indeed, there's some very interesting research done by Jeff Leach of the Human Food Project, showing exactly that and what's happening with the diversity of our human microbiome. But what's interesting to me is how you talk about these convenience or the increase in convenience leads to the decrease of the diversity of the human microbiome.
Yeah, definitely. You can nearly, like you say, you can see how we're decreasing the amount of species that live in our environment across all parts of our environment. So if you look at the range of and the species of fruit we eat, I think it's come down to a very small percentage of what our ancestors used to eat. And what this is doing is it's decreasing the diversity of bugs that live inside of us. So we need to remember that this environment also exists within our mouth, within our body, and what we eat. When it comes from an environment like this, it actually affects that in exactly the same way. It's fascinating, yeah. And this is where we're seeing all the different health problems associated with the microbiome and its loss of its natural environment, environmental state.
And so does that lack of diversity and the lack of the sort of natural variation that we have in the oral and indeed the gut microbiota, let's concentrating on the oral microbiota, does that lead to a situation where you might be at increased risk of, say, infection with strep throat or other pathogens?
Generally, if you use tooth decay as an example, we know, our first kind of impression of tooth decay was it's an infection, and we still call it an infectious disease of strep mutans. But we know as time moved along, we started to see, hang on, there's other species involved here. But what we're actually finding out now is that it's more caused by a tip in the whole population, because you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of different species living in an environment. When we feed the population the wrong food, then these faster digesting microbes like strep mutans proliferate. They overgrow, and the slower digesting ones that are more designed to break down these natural foods like cellulose and fibrous structures of plants and vegetables, they're outnumbered. And this is when the disease state comes in. This is where tooth decay, what happens is that they metabolize faster, they release acid, and they break down the tooth structure, causing tooth decay. And so it all stems from this overgrowth from what we eat.
So it's not the sugar per se causing the dental decay. It's the sugar feeding a bad organism which releases acid very quickly, but also the prevention of the slower digestive organisms. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we know. If you think about it, using sugar as an example, so in the environment, sugar is encased in cellulose structure in vegetables and most fruits. So what happens is that when we digest, is that our microbial environment is designed to have all these different bugs start to digest the food. The slower digesting break down the cellulose, because as humans, we can't digest fiber ourselves. We need to eat fiber to feed our microbes. And so the slower digesting bugs break down this cellulose structure, and then they release the simpler sugars, which humans create energy from, and also these faster metabolizing bugs come in and then they take their part of the pie, as it were. But yeah, so when we release a simple sugar into that same environment, which if you think about, you know, ancestrally in the environment, it's very difficult to find a simple sugar. You know, besides perhaps a honey, a beehive, or some kind of quite juicy fruit. It just doesn't happen. So when we're exposing our mouths to these simple sugar onslaughts, what it does is it changes the population, and then we have this, what they call it is the metabolome. So the overall metabolism of the microbial environment shifts. That's when we get this acid production. We get a lower in the pH, and then tooth structure starts to degrade. And tooth decay doesn't occur in any significant significant number in the wild. You don't see animals with tooth decay because they simply don't have access to these kind of foods. And it's the same as our ancestors. Well, traditional societies, all through evolution, you know, we had straight, healthy teeth without the presence of tooth decay. And you can see that there's a microbial answer as to why this occurred.
So I remember years ago, one researcher, forgive me, was it Western A. Price, I don't know, who looked at, was it Papua New Guinean natives, and their jaws were larger. They didn't have the issues of impacted teeth, of wisdom teeth. And is that Western A. Price?
Western A. Price looked at many different societies. I don't think he looked at Papua New Guinea, but there has been studies on Papua New Guinea. But across the board, this is what all researchers, you know, there's Corricini did a lot of studies on Australian Aborigines as well. What happens is we get when humans eat a natural, locally sourced diet with the full spectrum of nutrients, then their jaws develop in a way that their wisdom teeth aren't impacted, their teeth are straight, and they don't get tooth decay. Weston Price himself, in most of the populations, found that tooth decay occurred in 1 to 2% of the population, as compared to what we see today, up to 30 up to 40 to 50%.
Wow.
of people experiencing tooth decay, and it's only very recently in our evolutionary history since the Industrial Revolution. When you put it into that kind of perspective, which is something we don't really, we kind of just see tooth decay as this. It's inevitable, isn't it? We get a hole in a tooth, we go to the dentist, we get it fixed up, move along. No, that's the end of the story. But we're forgetting that all these biological processes are completely unbalanced, and they are affecting the rest of our body.
And I might point out to our listeners that, the convenient industrial revolution has led to the convenient medicine, which seeks to basically do a patch-up job of something that we could have prevented the damage to all along. Yeah,
that's a great point, Andrew. And I think dentistry is a great example of that. We've seen such advances in the dental industry in the last 100 years, where technology, we can nearly do it. We can throw an implant in, we can restore nearly any kind of problem in the mouth. But we've forgotten that why to ask the questions of why these diseases are happening at all, and what's it doing to the rest of our body. And the same goes for all other kinds of conventional medicine, where we look for our silver bullet, a medication or a treatment that knocks something out and really doesn't get to the source of what the problem is.
Steven, you wrote a really interesting article, the Oral Microbiome Connecting the Mouth-Gut Axis. Let's talk about that, because I like the sentence that you had in there that the mouth is the tip of the iceberg to the rest of the gut. So how can choosing different foods, and indeed chewing them more properly, and adding, making sure that you're salivating enough, how can doing that affect the gut microbiota?
Yes, I mean, we've heard so much conversation about the microbiome over the last few years and how gut microbes impact our health and our body. But there's been much less conversation of the communication between the mouth and the gut. And it seems very obvious now that we're talking about it, but we haven't heavily related the mouth and the teeth and dental disease to, potentially tipping all of these. And we can directly draw correlations right from where we're holding a piece of bread, chewing on it and swallowing it, how it's changing our entire body. So I think it's a really exciting area where we can draw and see how food and our health is all interrelated to nutrition, but also our dental health.
Yeah. The simple one, the simple example I'm thinking of is if you bolt your food, if you stuff the food into your face and don't chew it properly and don't chew it till it's a paste, then you've got larger, less surface area chunks of food down there for the digestive processes to act on, which can then be fermented by various bacteria. Unfortunately, many of those are putrefactive bacteria down in the small intestine and even into the colon. So how does then that affect things like dysbiosis and small intestinal bowel overgrowth and therefore diseases like irritable bowel syndrome?
Yeah, I think the physical factor that you're talking about is something that we suffer from. And the reason being is that most of our foods now are half digested themselves. They're processed, they're soft.
Yeah.
We are designed, like we talked about before, with to start digestion in the mouth. And Ayurvedic medicine actually has there's a concept where they tell you to chew for every one of your teeth. So you break down the food in your mouth 15 to 16 times so that the digestive process has this opportunity to start. But I think if you think about a natural foods, and we did introduce cooking quite early in human evolution, but foods were much tougher and required much more chewing than what they do today. So
yes.
almost by default, we would have had to chew more, which is much more what we're designed to do. So certainly, there's definitely a physical factor where we're not chewing enough, and how this affects digestion, and we can see it actually affects our jaws, and is a big factor into why we see crooked teeth and wisdom teeth problems now, because our jaws aren't developing because of this physical chewing. But also the digestive factor, where what I see is where we're putting softer foods that don't require as much chewing, but are also changing the bacterial shift that, like we talked about before. That's the big, that's what's really causing the imbalances in our digestive system.
And what about going a step further than that, about gut dysbiosis affecting systemic disease with inflammatory cytokines being released and things like that?
Well, exactly, and that's such the exciting area of what we've discovered over the last few years. How the interface of gut microbes and how they manage the gut lining, and on the other side we have 80% of our immune system. So our entire interface to the world exists in the gut, and we're talking about the gut-brain axis and how it influences autoimmune disease, which we're seeing such rises in, digestive problems, metabolic problems. These are all coming back to the microbes, and how we can and how loss of diversity or dysbiosis can trigger all these problems across this one lining that really is like I said, our barrier with the world. But what we're really discovering now is that how our oral microbiome influences our gut microbiome, and this is something that we haven't really discussed a lot in how our food and how the bacteria in our mouth influence our stomach, and we know this happens. So what we can do here is start drawing the correlation right from the food we eat through to the oral microbiome, to the gut microbiome, through the entire body.
So this to me seems like our use of probiotics is again in itself a reductionist aspect of really what we should be concentrating on, and that is how we feed these bugs. A vegetarian-based diet, chewing properly in a stressless environment to aid proper digestion. Is that where you're heading with this?
Yeah, the use of probiotics, a lot of the research shows that, if you take a probiotic, the impact on the stomach is very, on the stomach populations is very small. So if you think that, you can change the populations of trillions of bacteria with one tablet, I think
right.
it's quite naive, and it goes back to the same problems that we were talking about in terms of treatment-based medicine and health. Yeah, the idea is that we need to create the base of the pyramid, the diversity through eating like you say, a plant-based, but also organically raised and sourced food that promotes this environment of overall diversity. There's not one bug that's going to save and change the entire environment. You need to feed the environment exactly what it's evolved to be itself.
So tell me now then, you've got a whole host of patients that are eating this Western industrialised diet, and they're coming into you with the pre-existing issues of dentition. What message do you send to them? What do you intervene with? How do you base your treatment to change what's happened?
Yeah, look, with dental disease, there is we're lucky. We do have the tools now to reverse a lot of it and to reconstruct a lot of the problems that the dental disease will cause. Unfortunately, through development, there's some things that we can't reverse exactly. But these aspects of our health continue all through our life. So, and one big factor that Price focused on was the consumption of and the importance of fat-soluble vitamins in the human diet. So with dental health in particular, the fat-soluble vitamins regulate how we absorb calcium out of the bloodstream. So without enough vitamin D and K2, we don't absorb the calcium from our bloodstream. Our teeth don't receive enough calcium, and this is what we see as being the core cause of tooth decay. In that the tooth structure is lacking the requisite calcium. Yeah. So
not just damage from the outside with a poor diet, but damage from the inside from a poor diet.
Exactly. So that's and these processes affect our teeth, but obviously there's many other processes that these vitamins are designed to do, and degenerative diseases that Price saw happen because of the deficiency in these vitamins, and how we can use tooth decay and gum disease as signals for many other problems happening in the body, and that's why we need to get this full spectrum of nutrients.
Indeed, I would urge our listeners to follow you on Twitter, where you share some great pictures of beautiful dietary intake of natural nutrients in their nice raw form. There's a couple of beautiful pictures there that made me salivate the other day. It was lovely.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, I think, that we all face today. Especially maybe as a male as well. Getting our heads around how to properly prepare food, and it's something that traditional societies nearly focused all their efforts on. There was such focus and such
it's a celebration, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly, celebration around food, and we've really lost that in terms of going back to how the industrialized processing of food, and it's something that I think we really need to relearn and start to talk about again. Yeah.
Okay. So again, getting back to your patients that you see in your practice, what practical steps do you institute? What practical steps can you give our listeners to say, let's start now? From now, what do you do?
Yeah. So it's a big list. The problems is that it comes down to very much the individual. There are a lot of issues in in modern society that we need to avoid. And a lot of them are the reason why we have imbalances in the first place. So, sugar is obviously a big factor, but with that is refined carbohydrates. So we need to start seeing where our intake of these simple carbohydrates are coming from, and we need to cut them out.
Yeah.
From there, we talking about grains, we often have an imbalance of omega-3 to omega-6. So it's getting that natural balance right from 3 to 6s. So the intake of your oily fishes, your flax seeds, black chia, all these foods that are rich and getting your balance right to prevent the inflammation that omega imbalances cause.
Yeah.
And then from there, it really will depend on the person's diet themselves. So dairy is a big problem today in terms of getting good quality dairy, and with pasteurization problems and grain-fed cattle, like we talked about, there's really an art around finding good quality dairy if that's a big factor in the diet. And grass-fed butter, I think, is one of the most nutritious foods that we can eat, and it's something that I highly recommend.
Now that's something I've never even thought of. Where do you get grass-fed butter from?
There's a few good brands. There's not many. It's quite difficult, and I think that's something that we need to really. There's some. The brand escapes my memory, but there's cultured butters that are locally grown that are great and delicious. I personally, mixing that with a tablespoon of high vitamin cod liver oil is an excellent source of fat soluble vitamins for those that have high risk tooth decay.
Yeah,
and that's something I do myself. And then from there, you are just looking at the quality of your food. So, I mean, it is a matter of breaking down your diet, and it does take quite a lot of bit of dedication and willingness to kind of educate ourselves about food preparation, oils, cutting vegetable oils out of that goes back to the omega balance. But there's always these foods that can cause problems that we need to source better and prepare better.
Absolutely. I would urge all of our listeners tomorrow, indeed today, to go out and source a normal eye fillet steak that anybody would buy at the local supermarket, and then source a grass-fed eye fillet and cook them at exactly the same time on the barbecue. Don't overcook it, but cook them at exactly the same time on the barbecue and just taste the difference. The obvious ones are things like, vine-ripened tomatoes and fresh farm-raised eggs. They're so
eggs is an excellent example,
yeah, obviously different, and very hard to go back to a tasteless tomato.
Exactly, and eggs is an excellent example. If you compare, if you go and get a cage raised chicken compared to an organically free range chicken, the color of the yolk is quite remarkable, and that bright yellow that you get in you can see that it's a completely different food, and the cage raised one is not food at all, and that's what we need to start to see.
Right down to even cracking the egg even opening the egg, cracking the egg
exactly.
shell. They're so flimsy these days. It's a real worry to me.
The shells are very much different. Yeah, exactly, and the composition is completely different. You can see, and all these problems exist across all of our food stuff, and it's quite difficult. I actually performed this exercise for my parents it was probably about 12 months ago now, and it was basically going through the cupboard and throwing everything out, and then repeatedly talking about why they can't eat this and why they can't eat that, and the oils to cook with, and it's really a re-education problem program, and we really need to be talking about it in society at a larger scale.
Well, I think the first step would be to get your book.
That's what I hope to be able to put all of this in a manner where it's quite understandable, where we see dental disease. I mean, I think it's amazing that we haven't crossed the dental field and the nutrition fields previously. I mean, it seems so intuitive to me, and it just hasn't happened at all. And there's a real opportunity there to understand our food and our health all from a much more holistic perspective.
Steven, there is one thing I must ask you, because you are a dentist and you must come across this issue time and time again, and that's the polarised view of fluoride. Tell me about your stance on fluoride.
Yeah, so I mean, look, you're absolutely right in saying fluoride. We've been arguing about it since the 60s. It's definitely it's tiring. I think that we are focusing on the wrong issue with fluoride. Fluoride is something that we've introduced to react to the presence of dental disease. That it doesn't cause dental disease. It doesn't cure dental disease. So fluoride must be seen as a tool used by the dental industry and obviously in society now. In Australia, we have water fluoridation as a reactionary measure to dental disease, but it doesn't get to the source of the problem. And whilst we can argue about the pros and cons of fluoride all day, the real issues lie within adding sugar to nearly all of our foodstuffs and the quality food that we're talking about. And so there's much more effective conversations that we can be having about our health rather than arguing about fluoride.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's probably a case of shutting the gate after the horse has bolted.
Exactly. I completely agree, Andrew. And we should always be asking questions about, about these issues. And both sides of the equation care wholeheartedly about our health. However, I feel that we need to come together and have a conversation about food before we, rather than worrying about, the fluoride issue.
Yeah. So again, I wholeheartedly urge our listeners to investigate your publication, The Dental Diet, and also I understand there's a download that people can get on your website, Dr. Steven Lin, Lin for Nelly.com. Is that right? Yeah,
so what we've put together there is a few ebooks about traditional societies, one based on Dan Butner's The Blue Zones, about these amazing places around the world where people live, where they have the most concentration of centurions, and also the societies that Weston Price visited, and a little bit about their food habits and amazing cultures they had around their nutrition and what they ate, which I think there's so much value there to be brought into modern our lifestyle today.
Dr. Steven Lin, thank you so much for joining us today and taking us through that. I mean, anything to do with the microbiome is interesting, and just I think exploring how we've got to really start at the beginning. We can't just be giving these little piecemeal after the fact treatments and expecting a whole world of bacterial populations in our gut to change. So thanks for taking us through how we can practically affect our health with that.
Oh, my pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today on FX Medicine, please engage with us and let us know what further topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in contact with us through our website, fxmedicine.com.au, or look for FX Medicine in your favourite social media platform. You can also rate and review us on iTunes, and we'd really like to thank those who have already rated us. It's through your continued support that enables us to bring you current, complex and relevant topics to enhance your practice of natural medicine.